Hello, everyone. I'm Theo Eshart from Henry Stewart Events, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Scaling for Success, Practical Insights for Navigating People, Process, and Technology, kindly sponsored by Brainrider. During the session, please send through your questions at any point using the questions box, which you can open by clicking on the question mark at the top of your GoToWebinar window. Also, a reminder that a recording of this session will be sent to you all tomorrow, so you can view it again at your own pace. Now, it's my great pleasure to pass you over to Scott Armstrong, CEO and partner of Brainrider, Don Mortensen, Director of Marketing at TDK, and Carolina Soto, Head of Demand Marketing and Operations at Roku. Thank you, and over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Theo. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. I love this community and these events, and so I'm really grateful for Henry Stewart hosting us today. But even more importantly, I'm really excited to talk with Caroline and Don, two amazing marketers, about their journey into leadership, their experience making things happen, and wow, do they make things happen, and their thoughts about what's important in scaling for success, navigating people, process, and technology, which is questions facing us all. So thanks, ladies, for joining us. Carolina, why don't you start us off with a little bit about yourself, your journey as a marketing leader?
Of course, and thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Scott, Brainrider, and Henry Scott for the invitation. I'm definitely excited to start this conversation. A little bit about me. I started my career a long time ago in the creative world, and later on moved into marketing, specializing in marketing operations. And just recently, also took over the demand marketing team here at Roku. Um, that has kind of helped me not only understand the back end, call it marketing operations, the processes, the tools, everything that happens in the backstage of marketing, but also now with the demand team, seeing what happens in the front end, how are we showing up out there, all the digital market channels and marketing tools. And it's been an interesting journey, I'll say that. And definitely just staying curious has helped me keep growing and just like kind of raising my hand and joining projects. So like that's definitely helped me not only take over more teams, but also understanding the creative mindsets and then bring in the data-driven folks. In this exposure I've had across B2B industries, from co-working, catering, now at the streaming world, which is definitely an interesting and fun one to join. And I'm excited just to be here to kind of share some of this experience and how I work with people, resources, tools, and processes to make sure that we're scaling effectively, and also share some learnings of what to do and what not to do in this world of creative ops.
So much for being here and sharing today. I love it. Don, why don't you go ahead? Tell us a little bit about your road to today.
Sure, and thank you for having me. It's good to be here. I am here in Silicon Valley, have been working here for 29 years in marketing and for mostly tech, mostly B2B. Started out in comms and doing brand storytelling, all types of writing and creative. And by working with PR agencies, design agencies, and marketing agencies early on, really gave me a breadth of experience launching big brands as well as startups in the dot-com boom of the mid-late 90s. Um, and then husband and I even had our own startup at one point in the Web 2.0 boom. So that all gave me the experience of what it is to build and create the stories, work for others, as well as understanding what it's like to really have that be the business owner and understand what's at stake. And so then mid-career, I went into corporate marketing roles and for global businesses, including Trimble and an e-commerce leader, and most recently 6 years at Facebook. And with those experiences, I really learned how to be a revenue marketer. And I think similar to Carolina, just looking at the demand, looking at the analytics, wanting to move from, okay, my team does wonderful writing, design, video, creative, to all of the ways that being an in-house marketer, it's like getting close to sales, getting close to product, building those wonderful integrated go-to-market plans and programs, um, and just really developed some expertise there that was fun to bring into my new opportunity, latest opportunity, which is at TDK, where I looking after marketing for our main sensors group globally. And I would say, yeah, at TDK, probably chances are the devices you use have our sensors in them. But even though a lot of people haven't heard about us since the Stevie Wonder campaigns and Andy Warhol campaigns of the 80s. So if you remember that, just know, yeah, we're now all B2B. Did a little B2C back then, but now back to B2B, more of an ingredient brand.
Thank you both for sharing. You both have got such great backgrounds and expertise. I encourage everybody today to, and you're open and willing to share. I encourage everybody today to submit any questions or thoughts that you've got. And then I'll provide some contact information at the tail end of the webinar as well. And if you want to sort of reach out and connect, you can do that as well. And Don, we've worked a little bit together, Brainrider and you, in an agency client relationship. So I know we're big fans. What I didn't realize is that somehow over a career of almost the same tenure, I've grown this big, great white beard, and you've grown expertise and leadership. It doesn't really seem fair from my perspective. But I love hearing about each of your journeys because it puts your thoughts and comments in that experience, puts it into context and where it's coming from, which is a wealth of knowledge. So let's get right into the conversation about
Mhm.
scaling teams and technologies, and specifically, how are you tapping into existing tools and adapting to new process? Caroline, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, definitely. So I think with everything happening, we kind of talked about it of like doing more with less, right? Like we've all heard about it. The pandemic came, everybody was booming. Then it was like all about growth, get as much talent as we can. And then it kind of was like scale back. So I think that's when at least most of my learnings have come of like how can we scale back in resources, maybe a little bit of also in toolings, but then that's when the processes start, right? So I think it's just a little bit of understanding what is it possible with the team and the tools that you have. It's not about getting more tools. Definitely, I've seen that, I've tried that. You always need those resources to handle those tools, so definitely do not go for let's get everything out in the market. It's more about understanding your business goals, what are your leaders asking from you, then aligning those goals to your team's goals and seeing what's possible, what's not. I really am like very attached to all this like marketing operations or even like agile processes where like there's this methodology, Moscow, that I really like to bring into my team, where it's like, what is a must-have, what is should have, what is a could have, and what is just something that would be a nice to have, right? And also aligning that to the level of effort that that would require. So kind of like just understanding it all, making sure that you're aligned with your stakeholders, and bring it all together to then build those processes and make sure that you're scaling efficiently, slowly, but also fulfilling those goals and business KPIs that your leaders are asking from you.
Yeah, amazing. And I think, you nailed it for those of us, particularly in the technology sector, where we spent almost a decade with the strategic request to do more with more,
Hmm.
to do more with less, to think about efficiency, to think about connection to objectives, to think about connection to revenue driving, as Don said. Really it's a big mind shift. And really it was a big mind shift that came with restructuring, which so mind shift with chaos. Navigating that takes some maturity, some experience. Don, how did that impact you? The request to do more with less in both circumstances. Like with the past companies that you've been with, and then in a transition to a new one.
Yeah, I feel like, okay, I'm going to go back to, and I know this is the case for many of us. Like my life was do more with less. I mean, from the hand-me-downs that I my mom got for the community to make sure that I had something that was new to me, first day of school every year, to then going into a PR agency in 96 that was growing faster than they could hire people. And so sometimes, even when the budgets are there, you have to do more than with less, like it was in the dot-com boom, because in a boom, you just can't get the best talent fast enough. Um, and so then when there was the dot-com bust, and it was, and the cycles, the big cycles we've gone through, the Great Recession, the current layoffs, in every cycle, whether you're in good times or in bad times, it's like your leaders want you to do more with less always. So going back to like the tools and processes, one thing, that's where I think it really creates this discipline of understanding. First, I would say the first thing I do in any role is, what is our planning process? If I wouldn't take a job that isn't, at least if they don't already do planning, isn't interested in creating that. Um, because once you have your planning cycle and process, and all your stakeholders from sales and product, and they, once they understand that you need to create a plan that's based on insights from the market, from your target audiences, from the marketing programs run to date, and then you get all your input, where are the areas that the business might grow, what are the levers, what are the new products coming out, what are opportunities for cross sell, upsell, all of that has to go into a plan. I would say, I never plan with a sense of what would be cool to do. I mean, I did when I was 30 years old, and then you can see how um, that puts creative teams at risk if you're only doing your plan based on what seems cool. Because, right, if you can measure what's working, what's going to drive revenue, create a plan for how to do that, which target audience, which, where you can grow, and then do the cool stuff. I mean, and then show how that can be influencing the revenue. That's the golden spot. So then that's my approach as far as process. Make sure it's simple, like make sure you have a planning process. And then lots of other things. I try to not overwhelm with process. It's like never process for the sake of process. Um, but where it's helpful, once you start seeing where you can scale better, for example, if you start bringing on a lot of freelance or agency resources, then oh my goodness, you got to have creative briefs. You can't just depend on the person that sits next to you understands exactly what you're trying to do. You have to have the creative briefs, get all on the same page. You got to build out some project management systems. And I love Asana. I know we're not here to like, but the idea of having something, I'm not here to like pitch certain vendors. I've used Rike as well, but something that is easy to have your system build out, to see, to balance that workload, to get the creative intakes, I think is so important. So like Carolina, I think the best tools are the ones that your company is already using. But in some cases, like mine, where when I came into this, I said there is no tool that will do project management for creative operations. And so I did bring in Asana with the help of a contractor, and so it is, that is one that I would say is an absolute.
What? And I think, your insight about Asana really is think through the strategy and the planning process and the needs of your team, and
Mhm,
then choose the simplest, most elegant solution to deliver against that, as
mhm,
opposed to getting distracted by shiny bells and whistles of things that maybe you don't need or you're not doing. I'm
mhm,
often asked, how does creative operations get a meaningful strategic seat at the table
Mm.
And you just answered some of that. You said, in fact, planning, which is a strategic function, is a core responsibility of creative operations. And connecting it to objectives and revenue and the roadmap anchors it in the business necessities of strategy. And so then you have a meaningful role at the table because you're really helping guide people into the art of the possible
Right.
and the prioritization of resources
Mm-hmm.
in, and I think you're 100% right. It's always been do more with less, which really is an exercise in prioritization, and it's an exercise in process simplification and improvement, but also process itself to lean into to making us more effective. Right now, one of the things that we're seeing within the marketplace is a real lean towards freelancers, contractors, and partners. And you nailed it when you said the making that successful is, first of all, recognizing that's the part of the economic cycle that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
We're back into growth mindset. We're back into do more, but we need to do it efficiently with less organizational spending, but perhaps more operational spending. And so piecing those pieces together, I think we've all been in a situation where suddenly we looked at it and we said, we have more freelancers working on the business than we know how to manage, than we're sure what they're actually even working on, or whether we know their output is aligned with what we're doing. And so figuring out a briefing process, figuring out a RACI process, figuring out accountability processes for your partners, really comes to the forefront, this part of the economic cycle. Carolina, what are some of, Don, thanks for sharing some practical ways that you look at that as well. Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the practical tips you've been using to sort of manage that transition? How are
Yeah,
you
definitely.
managing partners or freelancers or technology? Like, I loved your what we need to have through to what might be fun to have
Right.
analysis. What are some other frameworks you use?
Yeah, for sure. And before we move to that, just adding to Don, I think a key aspect of this is when you're talking to your stakeholders, trying to be a partner more than like I come here to establish processes to bring these tools or to bring into these agencies, these contractors. It's more about like you're talking to sales, try to talk their language, try to understand what are their pain points and how can you solve them. Talking to the marketing folks, talking to the creative folks, and just being that partner that they know you have their back. I think that's what's helped me a lot to kind of bring all of this together. And then having those feedback loops where like, hey, this is working, this is not, and this is what we need. I think it's also key in there. And to your question, so like I think it's a good way of managing in a when do you need those resources? How are you gonna bring them in? And what are you gonna bring them? What are you gonna bring? Is it platforms like call it like Fiverr where you just bring in people, connect, project, plug and play, do and go? Is it freelancers? Is it through agencies? Is it through contractors? So the way I like to do it, as you know, my process mindset, it's always when is this like a lack of expertise? Like, am I just looking for somebody that knows a tool or that knows a process or that knows something that my team doesn't have the skills, but we don't really need somebody in house to have that skill? Then that's when you recognize, so what kind of partner I'm looking for there. When it's a high workload and it's just somebody that comes in and helps you kind of level up that workload and kind of help your team on those tasks that might be mindless tasks, just quick things. That's when like maybe somebody like a freelancer comes in and helps you kind of release that workload. Or even I'm gonna throw it out there, AI, right? Like there's all these conversations about AI, like when to bring it in, when to not. And I think it's like we should not be scared of it. It's just a matter of understanding how it works, understanding what you're putting out there, what's coming in. I'm a firm believer of like first party data, AI, not open AI, because that way you're managing your own data, you're learning from your own data, and you're not bringing in data that who knows where it's coming from. So that's also something that I always try to help my team with. Like, what tasks are you doing that maybe some AI tool can help you kind of speed it up? Um, and then once you kind of identify that when, like, what are you looking for, then it's defining those needs. and going through the agencies, the contractors, the freelancers that have those skills or have those um, tasks relieving services that can come in and help you in a plug and play. Um, and yeah, ultimately just aligning with your team, like what are the best practices? How do we want this done? What is the ultimate goal, right? Because sometimes we get lost in all these tasks of like, we need to do ABC, but like, is it really, do we need to do it? So to your point of like, what is a must? What is a could? What is a should? What is a nice to have? And just aligning that to be as effective as possible when bringing this external resources to help us in the team.
Amazing. Hey, webinar listeners, if you weren't taking notes over those last two answers, you're crazy because you're missing out on some real practical nuggets. Um, I think alignment with stakeholders and the amount of communication and engagement it takes as a peer to do that would be one theme that you started with that I would really highlight. Everybody who's successful in these roles that I've seen in action does a really good job of that. It's often if you're a process person, you tend to be focused more on the process. You might even be a little more introverted. You're going up against sales, often the loudest voice in the house. And so you kind of need to break out of your shell a little bit and say, I have, as Don said, I have so much value to add strategically into this process that I can feel free to speak up and engage and consult and advise outside of my area of operations or even outside of the area of marketing. So I think that's amazing. There's so much conversation about AI going on. I think you framed both the resourcing, the technology, and the AI conversation right, which is what's the use case? What's the actual practical need that I have? And then what do I apply against solving that need, whether it's a resourcing need, whether it is a tool need or a process need, and where does AI fit in that? Instead of being fearful of AI, engaging with AI as a tool, as a competitive tool, but also as a new tool that's literally going to take a decade to really get the kinks worked out of it, as all new technologies and tools do. So I think that's a real practical framework. It's not should we use AI? It's really what's the use case? What's the need? And then what are the different ways to solve for that need, of which let's not be afraid of AI. I think that's really neat. Don, what's your thoughts in the technology evolution, the AI sphere, the evaluation of need?
Yeah. I mean, I think like many of us, well, okay, let's also realize a lot of us have been doing marketing for machine learning type solutions for, I know I have for a decade, first in e-commerce and then at Meta. It's just that we weren't highlighting that AI slash machine learning was the back end. And I was fortunate at SLI Systems e-commerce tech 10 years ago to have a very visionary CEO that was bringing me into working on his presentations about how the future of AI and VR was going to influence e-commerce. And that future is now. Like I've watched it unfold since that 10 years ago. But oh my goodness, I don't know that I ever saw what was coming for creative fields. Even had fun like 2021 playing around with things like Dolly. And then Dolly too, I was like, oh, this is fun, goofy. What can we mix together? But then I think, like many of us, it's like that November 2022 when Midjourney 4 came out, I said, okay, I mean, I was sitting with some analyst friends having conversations about things like, I think we should encourage our kids to be plumbers or, something with their hands. And so we all went through that AI panic. Um, I don't know, did we all? I know some people did. And then I said, I need to learn. I need to have, as a marketer, I need to have a point of view. I could see that I was going to have executives coming to me and very quickly looking at both the promise and disaster of AI to say, can't we do this with AI? Can't we just use this tool instead. So what I did to learn and discover my point of view is I committed to use as many tools as I could in from that November 22 through today. And so it very quickly became clear that the hype and versus reality, there was a big gap. Um, there were some things that I would like to do, and I hope that AI will be able to help us with like easier video editing in a couple years. But the reality is that now, maybe using ChatGPT for something like social or SEO copy can give you a starting point, or can maybe, I hate to say, like, help do the work of a just out of school copywriter for those things, but it cannot replace like that creative direction, that decisioning, that making things unique. And so now, now in 2024, we're in this era where we all get frustrated when we see things that are easily written or designed by AI. And I know personally have spent the time understanding it to have that point of view. And yet, also when it comes down to which tools to actually integrate, I have a few. There's a presentation tool I've used. We've got an integrated TDK GPT that I can use with private data. So I think those integrations are nice. And then if you're whatever CRM you're in, whatever marketing automation tool you're using, whatever ad campaigns, I've tried like LinkedIn ads, AI recommendations. So far there hasn't been one that I've accepted and implemented, but I like that it's trying. I like that it's highlighting. I think that these are ways that we can accentuate our skills. And I think that it's not going to lessen the need for creative outsourcing and resourcing. It's not even going to make the need for junior copywriters to go away. It's just going to create the need for everyone in the creative space, as well as in a leadership and management space, to understand that the skill is the edit, the choice that you make, the how to use the prompts. And that is a skill that all of us absolutely need to continue to have as we watch this AI enabled future unfold.
Yeah, it's something, if I can kind of like join that, is I've I've seen how when people are starting to think about the prompts that they're gonna ask this AI tool, sometimes those questions you forget as a marketer, like what is the question or the pain point I'm trying to answer? And just by creating those prompts for AI to respond, you realize like I might have missed this, right? And like so it's just kind
Hmm.
of like give and take. And yeah, like definitely seeing that improvement of that mindset of what are the exact questions that I'm trying to solve here. And should those questions even
Hmm.
be asked to my own team versus just the AI tool? So that's something that I've enjoyed using AI to just like, how am I thinking of this? And I didn't think of that in the 10 days that I've been working on this project, right? So I think that's something very interesting that as we take on these tools and as we learn and they learn from us, it's also those questions, like to keep in mind the right set of yeah, things that we might miss and we don't want to miss.
You are both such strategic leaders, right? The most powerful strategy question is why.
Mm-hmm.
Not a very complicated question. It can be complicated to answer. It takes some experience, knowledge, and wisdom to answer it successfully. But asking why and understanding how to lay out those choices is really part of your answer. So that's the most practical thing that I would take out of everything you've said so far. But there were four other pretty practical pieces. The first, and I say this all the time, if you have ever yourself or seen someone use Adobe's wand tool, you have played with machine learning and AI.
Yeah.
right? It's been integrated in lots of what we're doing. So we are definitely in a hype cycle right now, and those capabilities are expanding. So the second is to figure out what's the right use case, what's the why. Don't be scared of it. Experiment and apply it against some specific practical whys that you have in your role where there's some wins to be had. The third one you will hear often, and you'll hear experiment. All of the AI advice right now says these tools are new. You're going to need to, we can't tell you how to use them. You're going to have to sort of use your own experience to put them in your own strategic context. The next one is human in the loop.
Mhm.
The process of selling and by default, the process of marketing is an emotional process. Emotion is a human value. And so to truly be able to make decisions and do insights that are connected to selling and marketing is going to involve human in the loop. And it's so obvious now, Don, when you see, poorly executed AI execution, that the thoughtfulness wasn't there. And it's really off-putting, which is an emotional reaction to the message that you do not want as a marketer. You will forever, if you want my opinion, want a human in the loop with all of these pieces for that very reason that emotion is so powerful. So that's lots. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
And just to add to that, one of the things that's so important as a foundation for us as marketers is the human we're marketing to. And so I just had to jump in and mention the most helpful task that I've found GPT can help with um, is in persona development. And so it's kind of
Mm,
ironic that something that helps me and my team be a more human marketer, I used a non-human tool to help with that persona development. And it's not like you can get a good persona by saying, give me a good persona, right? It's
right.
like, it's because I've already done persona building by hand that it just gave me if I was getting stuck and trying to think like, oh yeah, what are the main organizations for CISO executives right now? And I go in and quickly learn some of the organizations, go validate them. Then it's like a 10 minutes spent on research for me on that question instead of 30 minutes. But it all comes back to using the tools to help us be more human marketers to other humans.
I think that's a great example and a great insight, right? The use of it as an input and even as a creative inspiration, like you would have used research previously or
Mhm.
data previously, and then to layer that into Carolina's thought, which is data sources and data governance are something that marketers need to be really, really careful about. Governance in this day and age around your messaging and process is just hyper important for organizations of all sizes. And when you're cutting corners and cheating around governance, you are actually incurring a cost in the future because you're developing the wrong muscles as an organization. And there's lots of, horror stories about that within the technology space. But right now around AI, the human in the loop and understanding where the data sources are and really establishing your governance and being both open, exploring and a little conservative in the output is, I think, really the right answer to management teams from a strategic perspective. To be able to do that, you kind of need to be a leader. So let me just take a couple minutes and talk about your evolution from people who were the doers to people who are doing through others. Because lots of people on this call, you often get into an operations role because you're very good at execution. And the transition to leadership is, I think, one of the biggest transitions in the business world. Harder than going from college to work,
Hmm.
or even from a sophomore to college, going from a worker to a leader or a team member to a leader is a big transition. You're two fabulous women who've led fabulous careers with these really great companies currently and in your background. What are a couple of the practical things you've used to sort of flip that switch and get the strategic say at the table, get the insight say at the table? Carolina, do you want to talk about what was a moment where you suddenly said to yourself, hell, people are listening to me. People are following me. I'm currently leading.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the biggest part was finding the right mentors and the right leaders that not only helped me develop my own skills, but kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone. So, like, that was the initial, like, what about this? Like, what about you try this? What about, or tell me like your needs, right? Um, that was the first thing that I think has helped me a lot in my growth. The second thing was kind of having that strategic focus of, I'm not only doing my job to fulfill these responsibilities or this list of tasks and just checkbox, but it was more like, what are the leaders of the company saying? What are the leaders in the industry saying that I can kind of bring into my day to day role and responsibilities to kind of then voice that out, right? And like attach those happenings, those trends outside in the market, but as well with the business leaders' goals, and then attach it and like, okay, so for me to be able to do all of this, I'm going to need to do XYZ, and for that I might need resources. So that was another way of like asking, I need help and I need support, and maybe that's the way I can grow my team. And that's how it worked for me. When I identify like where are the priorities, what can I do, what can I have help from tools, but also when do I need people, and be very clear of like how these people are going to come in and how it's not just a cost, because often we are seeing the marketing teams as like the cost generating teams versus revenue. So that's the part where kind of like Don mentioned at the beginning, like make sure that we're attaching to revenue, and like by me having this team, having the support, I'll be able to bring this much revenue, or I'll be able to be effective and do this processes faster maybe, or implement all of these new strategies that will get us to where we want to be. And the third thing I will mention is just that communication. So back to that stakeholder, right? Like making sure that your
Mm-hmm.
people know you, people understand what you're here to do, you understand what are their communication needs, like how do they speak, literally, like just sit in that table and don't come be all technical to somebody maybe on sales where they're like, I don't understand anything
Right.
you're saying. But it's more like, what are their communication needs, what are their pain points, how can I solve them? And that way also like being known by the company as like, this person is a great partner to have and she'll figure it out. It's also something that's helped me kind of like grow into that leader role and that head of teams.
There are three, that's amazing. There are three, and no wonder you're leading. There are three real practical insights that you just shared there. One is mentorship is really important.
Hmm.
So being a mentee or being a mentor drives a lot of leadership within business, and finding one is really important. The secondly is, it sounds like you started out thinking like a leader. You asked why, not just what or how all the time. And I think that's really powerful, and you're allowed to do that at any level. Don't be too chirpy when you're a junior doing it. Ask why because I want to understand, not why because I necessarily want to change the agenda today. But that why discussion will let your mentors really identify you as someone who's thinking. And then the thirdly is communication and alignment and understanding the goals and objectives. So I tell you, if you would do well worse in industry than throwing your resume into Carolina and say, I would like to learn from a leader like you to become a leader like you. Don, is there anything you want to add based on your journey to that awesome answer?
Thanks. That was a great answer, and I can relate to the curiosity. And when a
Mm,
leader sees that in you, and I mean, I was fortunate, very like literally months into working with Weber Group, which turned into Interpublic soon in the late um, in the late 90s. Yeah, I was very fortunate to have a leader just bring me into the meetings. Bring me in. Just let me
right.
listen. Let me
Listen,
hear
yeah.
everything that all the conversations she was having with the executives were our clients, and then ask me to do something and give me the coaching. But it's true that as you and I was a manager very early on, but I was a manager. You get to be a manager by being great at what you do and then saying, hey, can you do more of what you do if you have a couple team of a couple people, or sometimes people start out with managing contract and resources. um, but then, yes, moving into that leadership role, I think really came as, I think one thing I can add to that is by looking at problems to solve that go beyond what your remit is. And I think a couple
Mm.
of examples of that that come up for people in creative fields is, um, I would say when I went into a corporate marketing world, because you work for an agency, you don't necessarily get to or have the opportunity to solve corporate problems. You go into corporate marketing and you're like, whoa, okay, I'm responsible for all outbound communications and content here. You're asking me to do XYZ, but I can also do ABC. But first, we need to, for here's a common one. I bet a lot of people can relate to this. You go into a business and you realize that they either don't have a brand positioning guide or their style guide is not consistent. And so your creative team, you find out a creative team or agency resource can be spinning their wheels because everything is going through 3, 4 rounds of approval rather than having those clear guidance, the clear brand positioning, so and good creative briefs so that everyone's starting on the same page, has the right phrasing and call to actions and and yeah, it has a plan. And
Yeah.
then you can get things down to often 2 cycles and it's done. And that feels great for a creative person,
Yep.
right? As well as being great for stakeholders because it allows you to come back and say, yep, we did this, it's on time, it's great, it's on budget. And and so one of the first things I did, yeah, like early in my career, is start saying this is the problem we need to solve and here how it's going to help everything um, downstream from here. And then the other thing I think I forgot to do for many years and had to learn is to not just assume that everyone knows what you're doing and why and what you're thinking about and how, right? Because I think I started out like building, oh, I'll just build our brand positioning guide and our style guide. And then you think everybody understands the value of this, or um, I'll start tracking the metrics and just assume everybody understands. And I learned that no, not like everyone's coming into a business. Your stakeholders are coming from different backgrounds. You need your chief revenue officer to understand what you're doing that's helping the business. And sometimes you have to spell it out for them very specifically because like Caroline and I know you said you can't just go in there with the numbers and the specifics. We can't assume everybody knows all the marketing terminology and wants to
Hmm.
20 statistics about each campaign. And so I had to get really good at forcing myself to think, what are the 2 stats that I need to share or in that I need to track over time for this program that are going to be meaningful? It's hard to make those choices, but it really pays off when you're communicating with stakeholders. You find that they start to remember, oh,
Right.
that engagement number really has gone up, rather than you gave them 20 stats every month and they can't keep track of any of them.
That is kick-ass leadership advice from a kick-ass leader for sure. We are at the same table as sales. And if you've ever gone to a sales kickoff or a sales quarterly, they spend at least 25% of the agenda celebrating their successes and
Mm,
wins. And when you go to marketing quarterlies or marketing kickoffs, We are just so much more passive around that. And
Mm.
then when you go into the operations mindset, we're all very service oriented. And so we think that people see it, but saying it out loud is part of important prioritization within the organizational culture. And it does take a mind shift to celebrate that way. And so thanks for sharing that as a tip. And if you're listening today and you haven't said, I'm kick ass like Don and Carolina are in a meeting in my organization, here's the data supporting what we're doing. Here's how it aligns with objectives. And here's the 1, 2, or 3 things that we're focused on and delivering on. Then write that down on a sticky note and put it on your laptop right now as your next to do, because that's possibly some of the best advice. You also mentioned working with partners, working, your background agency side, and in an era of do more than less, really, it's about working with partners. That's the only way you're going to get it done. When we work with clients, new clients or existing clients, we're really asking 4 operational questions to get the strategy right, which is number 1, what's the work? Number 2, how much work is there? Number 3, what are the skills that are going to be needed to get the work done? To Carolina's point, do we need these skills in-house or not? And then fourthly, what level of integration and collaboration do we need? What level of scale do we need to get all of this done? Those 4 questions can really help you strategically understand the decision of what to send where within your resource mix. If you're not running a resource mix of freelancers, consultants, and partners, agency partners, then the first place I would start is ask those 4 questions and then ask what's the why behind those answers, and how do I triage or assign that work to the most efficient and effective route? And then what process and support do I need, like brand standards, like better briefs, like better regular cadence communications, like engagement of stakeholders, like alignment, all the things that you've been talking about? How do I make that happen within that ecosystem? Because it's a complicated world. That's a preamble to this question. How do you think about choosing the right partner around expertise level, trust, cost? And how do you decide what work you're sending to who? That's a big question. We're almost running out of time, so sorry about that. But it's a great question. Go ahead, Carolina.
Yeah, so back to kind of like understanding first the needs of what you're looking for, right? Like again, is it a skill set? Is it an expertise skill that you're looking for? And then just kind of defining, I think, the cultural fit. Sometimes when we work with agencies or contractors, we forget that piece. And it's a very important piece because you need that person or that agency to kind of like embed inside of your team so that they understand fully what you're looking for. If there's not cultural fit, if there's not that like easy communication, back going to communication, it won't work. So I think like also asking not about only of skills and tasks that we need to do, but also that cultural fit. The sad part and boring part is costs, right? Like costs and contracts. Like what will it take us to bring you on board? How much will it cost? What would do we need to do in the timeline? Because also timelines sometimes come in and kind of like change things here. You're thinking like, I'll get this done in 2 weeks, and then it turns out that the contract will take 3 weeks. So also having that into account of like, when do I need this by, and who's going to be able to do it at that time? Because that might change. You might have an agency in mind, but turns out the agency is going to take longer. So maybe a contractor is easier, or a freelancer is even faster. And then I would say kind of do trial projects. I always like to start small to make sure that what we're talking about and we're aligning and what we're getting delivered is what we're looking for. Instead of going for this big project of what my team is uh, yeah, like looking for the best of the best, and then it turns out we didn't, and we just spent not only money but a lot of time trying to work through it. So also do those little trial projects to make sure that it works out and that's the best partner for you. Sometimes we're blinded, but going back to that like bright shiny object, this agency's super big, or they're super famous, or they're working with this big tech giants. Like focus more on what you need and all of those pieces that I'm sharing: communication, the cultural fit, the cost, the timeline, the skills. and ultimately select those partners based on this trial projects that are delivered the right way or the way you need it to.
I think you need to give advice to anybody who's in an RFP process that it's not bright, shiny object, and that part of that agency or partner selection should really include some trial projects. We don't work with anyone without starting with a trial project because we know that you can't be successful the first, it's like a first date.
Mm-hmm.
You're not even real people until you actually get to the end of the date and you sort of see how that went through. And so trial projects, I think, are brilliant. Cost is always part of that decision-making factor around alignment. And remind me to follow up with you afterwards because Brainrider's got some amazing cost-oriented solutions where we're tapping into our global agency network to really deliver more effective resourcing solutions for clients in a much easier way. But sales aside, I think focusing on cost is important right now because it's the efficiency word, but it has to be connected to cultural fit, right? If you don't work well together, if you don't understand each other, if you can't communicate well, it doesn't matter what the cost is, what you're not going to be efficient, which is really what we're being tasked with. None of us are working for organizations that don't have budget. We're actually working with organizations who want to make wise decisions around prioritizing the use of their budget. So I think that makes sense. And you went to really a version of the same four questions we use, right? Which is, I need to understand the why. I need to understand what is the work. I need to understand the capabilities around the work. I need to understand how much work is there. And then that level of integration really helps decide, can I just brief this by email? Do we have to work collaboratively? Or even in the way that we worked with Don in our meta role in the past, do we even have access internally so that we're working on the same communication systems and drives and documents? So I think that's all a real strategic answer to how do you choose the right partner and how do you triage work. Don, what about your perspective?
Yeah, I would second all of those things. And the flexibility of a provider that can listen to the need and the problems and come up with those creative solutions. That's what I would look for. Again, not again, it's like I would never go first to the big shiny agencies unless it was someone already embedded with the company. Sometimes you have to start with that. But in one case, I started with that and repeated failure and was so frustrated. And then coming to an agency solution where there was that flexibility of let's see what you need. And oh, yes, okay, we can let you get. Well, one thing that always to look for that I'm going to add is finding an agency that allows you to meet the person that they say that they've found that's ideal for
Mm,
your fit. It sounds basic, but I mean, some of the big agencies that are just like, okay, you give us the job profile and exactly what you need. And, you can have a 2-minute meeting, but you don't really get to interview candidates. It's it's very hard to commit to something like a 3-month contract with someone until you get that sense of what is their working style. Um, and therefore, it's to have a business that allows you to have a conversation or provide recommendations, or again, just that flexibility. What is it that you need? I think that those are the types of vendors and staffing agencies that can really help with needs that are maybe not big cookie cutter. And so that's something that I would always look for and will continue to.
yeah, I think that's really great advice. We work with our teams around that cultural conversational fit to really make sure that anybody who becomes a brain writer is not trying to be Don Draper, isn't a jerk with a Hawaii dark shadow in his past or her past, but in fact is a great listener and starts with trying to understand the client's needs because you all are brilliant. as we've seen in this call, right? Like you're really amazing, thoughtful, strategic partners to work with. You need help. You particularly need help to scale what you're doing. You don't, to Carolina's point, need an agency to slow down the process by overthinking or trying to add value in areas where it's already been figured out and decided. And so that conversation and then looking at your partners for the ability to listen is a great selection criteria along with the trial project. And then when you decide where to put your work, it's really, to Carolina's point, what's real simple that I can brief with an email? What's executional work at scale that needs studio support or would be better off with studio support to get it all done quickly? And what is a level of strategic input that we might be briefing in where we're actually looking for new ideas or strategies, not just great strategic execution? I mean, that's all practical advice. I could talk to the two of you and would love to talk with you on stage and in person at one of these events because I know you get so many questions. I'm seeing questions pop in.
Oh,
So we've
great.
only got a few minutes left. Do you mind if I switch? So I'll say thank you for all of those insights. And remember, everybody, reach out. I'll put a slide up in a second. It'll allow you to connect and reach out, and we can sort of connect everybody. But these two are amazing leaders to get to know, and Brainrider would love to help you with any of the thoughts that we've talked about today as well. But let me get to some of the audience questions. Let's see if I can do this correctly. Okay. So, there's one from Dwight. Who says, this month I'm starting school to obtain my BS in marketing. I aspire to be like you folks in the future. Yeah, me too. My career goal is to become a creative director for an ad agency. Okay, Dwight, that maybe you should call me. If you could take a time machine back to your junior self going through school, what sage advice would you give yourself in academia to reach some success in the corporate world someday? Great question. Let me frame up the first answer with what both of these leaders just said, which is become a good listener, become a good communicator, and become curious around the why of what you're doing, not just the what you're doing. Anything else you would add on
Internship.
top of that for Dwight? Go ahead.
Internships. Internship.
Mm,
Yeah.
Take any that you can get, as many as you can get, and if you can have one with a bigger agency and one with a more boutique, perfect.
yeah, that's great. I think that's super smart. Let me move on to the second one, which is what are some creative operation metrics and reporting tools, data processes that you suggest measuring to ladder back to business goals and revenue? And this question comes in from Amanda. And Amanda, I want to talk to you because that's, I think, one of our favorite topics internally is really what are some of the key data points to help support the strategic value proposition of creative operations, creative studios, creative execution, creativity within the organization. Carolina, what are some of the specific metrics or reporting tools? And don't share anything proprietary, but what are some of the areas that you're playing with to answer that question?
So it's a mix of things, right? Because you have like the vanity metrics of marketing, which always come into mind when like you're talking to marketers. But ultimately, like how does that, back to my answer, like to those business goals? And then when it comes to like processes, I think what it's helpful to know, it's that methodology that I shared before of like agile, where you're like measuring how your team is performing, and ultimately if you're delivering on the timeline that you're delivering, that you're supposed to deliver, um, making sure that you're kind of like checking those boxes of everything that with the stakeholders, that the needs that were presented to you. So I think there's those two pieces of metrics, like the internal metrics, how's the team performing, is it something that we need to fix? Is it a process? Is it a tool that we need to bring in? What gaps, and identifying those gaps? And then on the external side, like how can we attach that storytelling of marketing of like all of these metrics that we're getting to ultimately that revenue and those goals for the business? So kind of attaching those two, I think, are the metrics that at least we use for our team to be successful.
Amazing. Yeah, I agree. And really look for the data that supports the answers to those for strategic operations questions that I was focusing everybody on. Like, let's identify what the actual work is. Let's identify how much work there is. Just doing that for an organization increases your seat at the table because most people don't see it. And then to Don's point, celebrate those wins. Okay, so we are running out of time. There are more questions coming in. We're happy to answer them. So I've just put a slide up that lets you connect with, I think it's our LinkedIn page, and reach out. We love this community. We'd love to continue to build this community. And then I'm going to finish up by saying, wow, brilliant, and amazingly generous and helpful. So thanks everybody for your questions and participating. It's clearly a hot topic. Thank you both for your insights and experience. I can tell everybody, both of these women are incredible marketers, thinkers, and leaders, and you just heard it for yourself. So it was a pleasure to chat with you. Would love to do more of it in an even bigger forum. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out to them or connect with me if you've got more questions. And I know more came in, and I let us go on too long in the conversation, so my apologies for that. But the conversation doesn't have to end here. A big thank you to Theo from Henry Stewart and Henry Stewart themselves. They're just a great partner. I love these conversations. I think they're very motivating for me. They're very motivating for the brain writers that listen, but they're really very motivating for the community. So come and catch us live in LA. I'm hosting another panel in LA at the Henry Stewart event on October 8th. Those are always terrific places to network and meet people in person. Webinars, they're amazing because we can do them at scale, but they don't have the hugs that I would love to give to both Don and Carolina for all of the insights that they've shared. And then a thank you to Defna on the Brainrider team who championed the voice of the client or voice of the customer information series that we've been doing. You all have so much great information. It's just fun to share it. So if you want to speak or share from your background, or you've got some topics that you're interested in hearing about, we run our own webinars. We participate with Henry Stewart and other organizations, and we love it. And on that note, thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.